name is Amy LaBella Rossi. I am a vice president within the Commercial Banking Diverse Segments team at Wells Fargo, and I am honored to be with you all today. I am joined by Tracy Gee, Chief People Officer of NACD, Ashley Marchand Orme, Director of Equity and Stakeholder Leadership at Just Capital, and Dr. Ryan Mitchell, Global Director, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at CBRE. I would like to take a moment for each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Let's start with Tracy.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy G, and I am the Chief People Officer for the National Association of Corporate Directors, and we are located in Arlington, Virginia. Pleased to be here this afternoon.
Great. Thank you, Tracy. And I'll go over to Ashley.
Thank you. Hi, good to be here with everyone. I'm Ashley Marchand Orme, and I serve at Just Capital as the Director of Equity and Stakeholder Leadership. I work primarily with Russell 1000 companies to help them think through their equity work, their goals, how they meet those. And I'm part of the Corporate Racial Equity Alliance, which is an organization made up of Just Capital, Policy Link, and FSG, helping to set standards on corporate equity and inclusion practices. So great to be here with everyone.
Great. And now over to Ryan.
Hello, all. My name is Ryan Mitchell, and I lead the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Global for CBRE, US largest real estate firm. My job entails working with key stakeholders across the globe to focus on advisory services, businesses, and provide that.
Oh, Ryan, I think we're having a little trouble hearing you, but hopefully maybe you can increase your audio and we can hear you for the next set of questions a bit.
Sure.
Oh, that's much better. Great. So with that, I'd love to get right into the content. I'll start off with Tracy. There's a lot of complex execution that goes into running an inclusive enterprise. But there is also so much hanging fruit when we speak about inclusion in operations. Mm-hmm. What is one inclusive action or practice that is low effort, high impact, and is a go-to for your company?
I love that question. I will just start by saying when I first joined NACD in August of 2020, we did not have a formal internal framework for DEIB. But I was working with this magnificent woman named Ashley Marchand Orme, who worked here at the NACD, and she and I started to put together an internal framework that I'm happy to say now, Ashley, we have implemented a version of that. So your work at NACD certainly is longstanding and has made an impact. With regard to low-hanging fruit, even before Ashley and I started working together on this framework 4 years ago or 3 years ago, I think, when I joined, I said we are going to have diversified slates, interview slates. We're going to have interview guides that focus on inclusion, and we're going to have representative slates of applicants. So whenever we had job openings, our slates were representative. Our interview guides were tailored to focus also on inclusion. We built into our face-to-face interviews a piece on inclusion to engage applicants, to understand what their perspective was on inclusion. And we built diverse interview panels of NACD managers. So those were some of the kind of quick hits, low-hanging fruit. And I think the most powerful thing that it did was before we were ready to release a framework, it sent a message that we're serious at NACD about inclusion, and we were very transparent about it in our communication.
That's great. Ashley, I'd like to ask you the same question, as I think there's some synergy between you and Tracy's answer. So
yeah, absolutely. And love hearing about this success you've had, Tracy, at NACD. It was a pleasure working with you on that. And I'll just note, now that I'm at Just Capital, we're a nonprofit whose mission is to see the U.S. economy work better for all Americans. And so we produce tools, programs, and research to help companies engage in getting us there. And we've polled over 189,000 Americans about what they want the nation's largest public companies to prioritize. And the number one answer year after year is that they want them to prioritize their workers. And of course, that includes prioritizing issues like wages, benefits, career development, worker health and safety, a lot of the issues that are tied into a worker feeling included in an organization. And because I think it's helpful to always just do a little bit of case making for investing in your workers, I'll just quickly share that when we look at the companies that perform the best across worker issues that we track, they outperform their Russell 1000 peers by 16.46%. And that's looking at these companies between December 31st of 2021 through July 31st of this year. And then to get a little bit more specific about your answer around inclusion, there are a couple ways that companies can think about amplifying worker voice. I think that's a really important issue when it comes to inclusion of your employees. And what that looks like can certainly vary, and how low-hanging that fruit might be can also vary depending on the organization. But the two quick things that folks can really be thinking about is ensuring that at a baseline you're providing employee engagement surveys, that you're providing those at least annually, and then disaggregating the results of that report by demographics like race and gender, so that you can get really specific about how those experiences of various groups may differ at your organization. And then the second piece is establishing or better leveraging your employee resource groups. ERGs can really help build that sense of inclusion at an organization and help employees feel seen. I know McKinsey produced a report in 2022 about ERGs and noted that employees certainly felt a greater sense of inclusion, not just when those ERGs were present at a company, but when they were effective. So that's also really important to consider. So I'll just leave it there.
Great insights, Ashley. Thank you. And Ryan, I would actually like to ask you the same question. What is your go-to practice or action for fostering inclusion within your organization?
Well, I think we have to think about inclusion at a local level. Even though we have a global strategy at CBRE, even though we're operating in more than 100 countries, it is really important for us to think about how do we enact that global strategy in a hyper-local manner. And one way that we do that, Amy, is by building inclusion councils that are tied to a market or tied to an office. Now, what's the benefit of this? You asked for low-hanging fruit, and I think this brings people together, much like what Ashley was talking about. It brings people together, but not just to commiserate about what could be going wrong, but it actually amplifies their voices as a council, because they should be the hands and the feet of the leader of said market in relation to employee inclusive practices. So if the goal of the market is to partner more with certain institutions or organizations, then that group will actually say, okay, see, greater organization. It amplifies the voices as well of the employee population. In addition to that, you mentioned employee resources. We have employee resources where inclusion is important. So we can also employee.
Ryan, not to interrupt, but I think I'm having some audio issues with.
You are? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're going in and out a little bit.
Okay, so I was saying that our employee resource groups are amplified on those inclusion councils by having ERG fairs where our new employees can actually hear about the Women's Network or the Black Excellence Network, OLA, and the others that we have. And it amplifies those voices.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Moving on to a different topic. During the global pandemic lockdowns, employees and business leadership had to be agile, right? In an unprecedented shift to work from home, where many of us were used to that 5-day work week in an office setting, and now we are, like all of us, in our homes. Now, we're in an environment where our workforce is distributed and a return to office discussions have changed. How has this impacted your employee engagement strategy, and how do you make it inclusive of your remote, hybrid, and in-office employees? And I'm going to turn it first to Tracy, and then you can go right to Ashley, because I think you both have some insights on this topic.
Sure. The pandemic for all of us was pretty much a common experience of both disruption and enabling, right? We learned some really important things and useful lessons, I think, that's important to the American worker, but it was also very, very disruptive. And so at NACD, what we found, we were out remote for basically 3 years. And that's not insignificant, right? That's a large amount of time to be, in effect, 100% remote. So we found that when we came back, we needed to recalibrate employee engagement. We had a lot of employees who didn't come back, who resigned, left for whatever reason. And we had a new population of employees that really hadn't worked together a great deal or for a long amount of time. So we created an employee engagement council. And it is actually very active, a very important part of our culture now. It is comprised of employees across the organization at multiple and varying levels of the organization, so we're able to capture their voices. And one of the first things we said was, there's no pride of authorship here. We want to be inclusive as we think about what our engagement priorities should be. And so they designed a survey. It was a 5-question survey. And we had a great response rate. And we took the learnings from that survey to start to build an engagement strategy. So our engagement team has met with the senior leadership team. I have reported multiple times their work to the board of directors, so they get that exposure. And they work with each other and other employees and managers really as ambassadors for us around engagement and around change management. And those are the best kinds of ambassadors, right? The folks who are doing the work, who understand the subtleties of the work. And it's been received very, very well. And one of the things we learned from our employee engagement council and strategy was that we really needed to shore up development for our middle managers, and that it was our middle managers who were really on the front line in managing all of the changes that the pandemic brought, right? It wasn't necessarily Tracy G, the CPO. On a day-to-day basis, there were managers who needed help and growth in areas like change management, inclusion, employee relations. And so that was our approach. And those were some of our learnings. And we're actually going to This is the end of the second year of the Employee Engagement Council, and we're working on our programming for next year, which will include another engagement survey released to the entire organization.
That's great. And so, Ashley, I'd like to turn it over to you to answer the same question.
Yeah, and I think it's so helpful to hear from Tracy those really clear, practical steps that helped, provide, for the needs of employees and sort of, think through how you navigate all of the volatility that came with the pandemic, right? And as you're thinking about bringing your workers back to work. I'll just note too, Fortune published an article about 2 weeks ago that pointed toward research that Johns Hopkins and Great Places to Work did. And they looked at more than 1.5 million people at over 2,500 companies. And they found that between 2019 and 2023, worker well-being actually hit its high point in 2020 and has since been on the decline. And yes, companies went through drastic changes as we were all trying to, figure out what this, COVID-19 pandemic meant for the way we live our lives, the way we show up for work. And, of course, in my role as Director of Equity and Stakeholder Leadership, I think about what this means for equity as we're thinking about the ways people show up for work, the ways people are able to, remotely work or have hybrid work experiences. And these researchers at Johns Hopkins and Great Places to Work found that there were disparities in terms of worker well-being among demographic groups. So older white and male workers are more likely to experience well-being, while Black, female, and younger workers were less likely to experience well-being. So my response is less about the tactics and more just about being really thoughtful and mindful about how these policies might have disparate impacts across your workforce, right? The way that different policies, return to work policies, hybrid policies impact your workers, can differ based on the demographic characteristics and, things like caretaking responsibilities at home. So I think it's just helpful to be mindful of that as we're thinking about what these policies look like and how to pursue tactics that uplift all your workers.
Really valid points. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just add one thing that I'm absolutely remiss in saying? One of the outcomes for us was we created a wellness strategy. So to piggyback on what Ashley's talking about, I hired someone on my team who was in charge of our wellness strategy for our employees at NACD. We don't have enough time now to go into it. I'm happy if anyone wants to connect with me through LinkedIn to share with you our learnings and our process. But it's culminated in a couple of weeks, we're going to have our annual summit where directors from all over the world come to the DMV for 3 days of intense development around governance. And we are going to have, for the first time, a wellness booth in the Inside Hub at Summit, where 1,200, 1,500 directors will be able to pass through and learn about wellness and why it's so important now in the context that Ashley talked about. And that is transformational. So we're trying to elevate this conversation about wellness and integrate it into the business context that it deserves to be integrated into.
That's great. Thank you, Tracy. Ryan, I'm going to kick this question over to you. Tracy did allude to it a bit in her commentary in the last question, but directors and managers are often at the forefront of implementing inclusive processes, right, and practices. What training has been and will continue to be beneficial to these populations, and how do you measure accountability across, your business?
Well, I think goal setting is the first that we should set forth. So what is an inclusive practice within your market? Now, how do we measure that? I think that comes through our employee engagement surveys, but also inclusion surveys as well. I think there's a reference to that. So we have a CBRE inclusion index, which is a part of the survey. It's a series of 5 questions, so about alongness of inclusivity. And succession planning implementation that also can be measured. What did we say we're going to do versus what actually happened? And as well, we have to look at turnover as a big part of how we measure success. If we are success, we should be able to not just recruit talent, but we should be able to retain said talent that we would like. And we want to make sure that we avoid regrettable turnover. And then in addition to that, we can measure promotions because we should see more women promoted. We should see more people who are disabled promoted throughout our organizations. We should be able to track that as well. But it doesn't start with just the promotions, Amy. It really means we have to be intentional about the succession planning process. And so as we're thinking about succession planning, how many individuals have we identified as ready now that are minoritized as a part of the minoritized communities? Now, we have to be thoughtful about that. And all of those things are how we should be able to measure some progress over time.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan. How we measure is really one of the successes of measurement is feedback, right? And so, Tracy, I'm going to turn this question over to you. How do you solicit feedback from employees and key partners? And what do you do with this feedback?
We ask for feedback. And that may seem to be a simple answer, but it's really powerful. Feedback can be pretty scary, and it can create an environment where people feel, if it's not managed well and appropriately, where they feel like they are being maybe judged prematurely. So what we've done is level the playing field to say, we want to be transparent. This is big culture change for us. So we are going to ask you what you think. And we began a conversation with the organization. So we would ask for feedback. Some of the feedback I got was, you guys ask us through surveys, but you never come back and tell us what you've decided. And so that was a conversation. We talked about that. We talked about why sometimes I'm not going to come back to you and tell you what the data says. Okay, it depends on what the issue is and all of the different stakeholders and how it will impact them. But for the most part, I'm going to come back to you and say, hey, I asked you this, you told me this. Let's talk about how we can build a bridge so that we can communicate, because that is what's really, really central to employee engagement. And that is, people will decide for themselves what they may need materially, or what decisions they should make with regard to what job or career I'm going to have. But what folks overwhelmingly appreciate is open communication, even if it stinks. Someone said to me, I've never forgotten this, to be clear is to be kind. Mm-hmm. To be unclear is to be unkind. And so I tell my employees that. I think the best thing I can do is be clear and be transparent. And this is new for us, and we're going to stumble and we're going to make mistakes, but we're going to get up. We're going to keep working through it. We're going to keep talking about what's important, and we're going to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So that's really my answer, Amy, is
it's great feedback.
Yeah, we ask for it and we get it. Yeah. Now, another thing, though, that's very interesting is we're now entering a different phase of the strategy. So it came to my attention, employees really want to be able to meet with the SLT or meet with senior leaders and ask them questions, and in a very kind of informal manner. Are you open to that? And I said, I'm absolutely open to it, but we need to be asking questions as well. So it is the conversation that we need to have, and not just a one-way dialogue.
Okay, great. I guess we're just about up on our time today. What a great discussion. But I just want to give everyone a quick forum to say maybe a few words about your call to action for other organizations to create an inclusive environment. So I'll start with you, Ryan.
I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I would say it's so important for us to think about the cultures that we serve internally, the talent that we're trying to bring in and elevate within our organizations, but also the communities that we're seeking to serve. It's so important for us to think about those clients, those customers, and those communities that we're serving so that we can seek to continue to reflect those communities internally so that then we can serve them even better.
Great. And Ashley?
Yeah, my quick final statement would just be for practitioners not to feel like they have to do this work alone. We have so many more resources and communities available now than we had 5-10 years ago. And so I know Tracy offered earlier that folks can reach out to her on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. Let me know if I can do anything to help. Check out our website, justcapital.com. We've got a tab at the top called Scorecards if you want just to know what we track that leads toward advancing worker well-being. We've got materials there, information for folks to take a look at, and communities to plug folks into. So don't do this work alone. It's really hard. So might as well be doing it in community. That's it.
Wonderful. I think we're just about at time. So thank you all for the interesting discussion today. Look forward to connecting with you as well.